Nurses of psych wards, what did a patient do that left you speechless? One of our patients escaped the ward and managed to hitchhike all the way to Sydney, about 900 kilometers. And this is why I don't pick up hitchhikers. In Australia, where you shouldn't pick up anything. Probably the saddest was a resident I had a long time ago. This gentleman was a WW2 vet with Alzheimer's and dementia. Probably once or twice a month he would relive some battle he was in. He would literally run up the hallway and grab you and yell at you to get down behind the sandbags. He would then tell you take his Thompson because it was too heavy for him. He would just use his pistol. Then he would get up and run back down the hallway. This guy was old and seeing him run full sprint like that up and down the hallway during one of his episodes was surreal. And X200B. I can't imagine having to constantly relive the worst moments of your life where you witnessed and survived the unspeakable horrors of war. A nurse told me one of her patients killed himself on the unit while on one suicide watch. Edit. Patient and staff were at arm's length and patient suddenly charged the wall, smashing his head as hard as he could, breaking his neck in the process. We had a Giro psych floor. Crazy old people. One night while passing through, a little old lady popped her head out her doorway and said to me, "I could sure use the company of a good looking young man tonight. Sorry, I'm not that good looking." Quick as snot on a doorknob, she said that's okay. I can't see too well. I didn't join her, but her charisma was on point. I watched a guy try to remove rats from his rectum. Stated that his ex-girlfriend summoned them there. He ended up tearing his rectal walls to shreds. I really don't know how a human can change from normal, having a GF and such, to what you described. This guy had multiple issues and ultimately had to be restrained and sedated. He was transferred from prison to state hospital. Not a nurse, but I used to be a security guard in a hospital, and we had a patient who self-harmed and cut a hole into themselves around their belly button and then stuck a bunch of paper clips and buttons and things like that into it. Not a nurse. Pharmacist. Had one of our clozapine patients miss a monthly meeting to discuss their medication. Called around. Found out she was in the ICU having eaten 2 of her own fingers, then visited her mother for coffee. Still bleeding. Had a friend tell me of another patient. Made a cut in his thigh and reopened it regularly until the whole thing was a scar tissue cavern. By some miracle avoiding infection. Started using his meat pocket to hold pens and coins and anything he could collect in his ward. Nobody knew until a paper clip pierced the side and he finally wound up with an infection that took him to ICU, where they found his stash. Meat pocket. Jesus. Dude. My sister was actually sectioned earlier this year for her eating disorder. She shouldn't have been, but that's his story for another time. And she was right next to the PICU, psychiatric intensive care unit. One of the nights she heard multiple screams coming specifically from that ward. One of the patients had bit a chunk out of a nurse's leg as they were trying to detain them. They then started eating said chunk. It's crazy to think these types of things happen. Edit. Sorry guys. I typed psychiatric instead of pediatric. She was only 15, so it was PICU. I just had a bit of a brain confusion. Not a nurse. But I was a patient in a psych ward. The ward was sectioned into 2 sides based on case severity. I was on the less severe side. One night, an incredibly tall, somewhat muscular man escaped his room on the severe side. Got through a door that was supposed to be locked. Got into the less severe side. And into my room. I woke up, sat up, and saw him standing in my doorway. He asked in a shaky voice if I was alright. I hesitantly said yes. To which he responded by getting a look of terrified horror and screamed, "I knew it. You can see them too. Don't let them get you," before he was dragged away screaming by security. I'm not a nurse but was a patient once. Giant dude got upset. One dude changed the channel from a football game he was watching and smashed his skull with his fists. Not fully, but enough that when they brought him back a few days later he started seizing and had to be removed again. Didn't see him again. Also, there was one lady who was straight out of the movies. Walking around preaching the end of days loudly and sweating like crazy. Not me. But my dad used to work in Airedale and J Ward, Australian insane asylum and prison for the criminally insane, respectively, in the 70s. He used to talk about sunny days in J Ward where they'd bring out all the inmates during a sunny day and they'd promptly line up and start jacking off. In Airedale they'd deal with the jacking off problem by strapping you into cotton mittens. But a lot of the inmates would chew a hole through them just to get a finger out to jack off with. His worst story was about a psychotic woman in Airedale. She had self-inflicted scars all over her face from scratching herself. Self-imposed bite marks all over her body from trying to eat herself. And she had the nasty habit of chewing the inside of her mouth and spitting blood at your eyes and mouth hoping you'd catch one of the myriad of diseases she carried. When I was a student doing a placement in a max security unit, a serial rapist was getting meds. Made a silly joke. The nurse said, "Oh, stop that." His response was, "I've heard that before." Not me, but when my sister was in a psych ward for her eating disorder, a girl tried to strangle someone with a bra. Last year my other sister was in there because she was suicidal and a kid tore a water fountain off the wall. Another kid screamed for his shoes, and personally my favorite was a kid whose mother told him he was going on a vacation but instead admitted him into a psych ward. Then he screamed to one of the staff that it lied to me. Rip out their tongue. He was left speechless as well, I presume. Edit Dart. Got assigned to child psych ward in a hospital where I worked. Easy gig. Wear street clothes. Not much to do but pass out meds and observe. 15-year-old black kid. Overweight. Is sitting beside me casually discussing his day when he jumps up. Begins screaming like a banshee. Flailing around. Looks like a seizure on roids, and I'm befuddled as to how to control him or the situation when after a few minutes of twisting my nerves into a tight ball, he stops, sits back down and begins talking casually again. Had one of his spells. Not sure if anyone has ever been that close to a raving maniac while he's having a fit, but it's disarming to say the least. A student. I was studying and well, this guy began to freak out and well carved out his intestines with bare hands. Never thought it was possible, but well, considering him being a former powerlifter, maybe it's possible. Guy was like 6'6" and has to be kept under constant supervision as he'd once tried to kill the compounder with food plates, then he was only given a paper plate and edible crockery. I saw a crazy bipolar woman bring a man out of full catatonia with a blowjob. This was years ago. Security wasn't as tight as these days. Somehow this extremely manic woman gets into this guy's room. Now the guy, let's call him Gary. Gary has been full catatonic since we got him. Couldn't care for himself at all. He would just stare all day long. Well, I guess she must have sucked the depression right out of the guy. Because he was right as rain afterward. We found them at the end of the session. Not me. But someone I knew was in a ward with a girl who wanted to be a vampire and drank blood from her own tampons. It's as atrocious as it sounds. She was around 16 and schizophrenic. Not a nurse, but have had several stays on psychiatric wards for bipolar. To be fair, on most occasions, I didn't enter the wards in the most rational and stable state myself, but what has tended to happen is that even when they bring you back down to earth, you can end up staying for an extra month or two before they let you go. So I have spent some time on psychiatric wards completely sane, if not maybe firing on all cylinders. Anyway, I have seen a few shocking things. Like a guy cutting open his wrists with broken glass and bleeding out pretty severely, but TBH. You quickly become desensitized. What tended to leave me speechless was the abruptness of certain behavior and its total incongruence with facial expressions etc. For example, sitting watching a TV when a 5'tall 7-stone woman calmly walks over, suddenly lifts the TV up and throws it into the wall with great force, smashing it to bits, and then calmly sits back down in an armchair declaring that the TV was ruining her painting. She wasn't painting, by making the armchair give her an orgasm. She never even raised her voice. She then immediately asked me, as if it was somehow related, if I liked Lisa Stansfield.